Hi. I'm Lori Peterson with PSS Coming of Age, and I am thrilled to have with me tonight Larry Jaffee. And Larry is the author of the book Record Store Day. We are here with a group of people who are interested in learning more about that. And first, let me tell you a little bit about Larry. He's a New York-based journalist, and his writing has appeared in the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Billboard, and various other publications. He co-founded Making Vinyl, a B2B conference that's devoted to the global rebirth of record manufacturing. When not listening to music on vinyl or crate digging, Jaffee teaches writing and journalism at local colleges. So welcome, Larry.
Thank you, Lori.
And here is Record Store Day, for those of you who haven't yet seen the cover of this book. So tell us, why did you write Record Store Day?
Well, I had met the leader of the Record Store Day, co-founder of Record Store Day in 2015. We became fast friends. I had been writing about the vinyl revival, and my angle was how what was being reported by the media was being underestimated, that it was a much larger resurgence. Now, I was late to the party, actually. I first became aware that something was happening around 2013 or so. Record Store Day actually began in 2008, was the first year. So I missed the first 5 years completely of Record Store Day, which is somewhat ironic.
How did it start?
So what happened in 2007, Tower Records was liquidated. They had over 200 stores in the United States, as well as around the world. And also two other big retailers, HMV, which is from Britain, and Virgin, which is also from Britain, had fairly large stores right here in New York.
I remember.
They were department stores for not only music, but also movies, books, T-shirts. They tried other kinds of merchandising. But for whatever reason, they decided they didn't want to be in the business here anymore. So what they did, so meanwhile, there were independent record stores that were still selling records and CDs, but at the time, actually, they were selling CDs. But a few of them were also selling comic books. And there was a few years earlier something that they called Free Comic Book Day. And as a result, people would be coming to their stores. This happened in Maine in particular, and they were telling Michael Kurtz from Record Store Day, maybe we should do something along the lines of Free Comic Book Day. And at the same time, another store in Atlanta also said comic books, but said, maybe we should try something with vinyl, because the used records would just fly out of the store as soon as they came in. People would unload their collections. So Michael started talking to some of the labels and received some interest. I mean, when it started in 2008, they really had no idea it was really going to take off. It was just a crapshoot, and we'll see what happens if it sticks. And much to their surprise, I believe,
It did.
it did, yeah. And the years following, I mean, that first year, when I said bring back vinyl, they realized they had to do it in a special way, and that it had to be music that really wasn't otherwise available. So,
Such as?
Limited edition of like outtakes, live concerts, stuff that made it somewhat rare, that collectors would be interested in.
Do you credit Record Store Day with leading the resurgence?
Yeah, I do. Actually, I think there's no doubt that if it wasn't for Record Store Day, this vinyl resurgence would have not happened that way. Now, it is true, in the early 2000s, or even the 90s, there were still records being produced, but those were for very limited markets, like audiophiles, DJs would have specially pressed mixes. But that's not even a blip on the radar screen. In fact, the RIAA stopped counting vinyl as a configuration by the late 90s. It was like not worth
where
their
are
time.
sales now?
So now it's about, well, what's an interesting thing happened. It's about 20% of music sold is still physical. And of the 20%, more than half of that is now vinyl. So last year was the first time that not only the dollar amounts, but also the unit sales were more than CD.
Now,
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast that you did not too long ago where you talked about having someone force you or convince you to get rid of your record collection. And I had to laugh because some professional organizer did that with me and said, it's time to let them go. And I did, except for maybe 20, including Sally Field sings The Flying Nun. But about 6 months later, wouldn't you know, they started making record players again. And I was like, dang. So I didn't have a collection. How many were in your collection?
I had 4,000 LPs, but I had been buying them since I was a teenager.
Well, I had two. When I was a child, my mother sent me to the store with $5 to buy socks, and I came home with the Revolver album.
Which is my favorite Beatles record. I would have done that too. I think.
Oh, but wow.
Those are expensive
Where
socks.
were you? Where were you storing your 4,000?
Well, at the time, it was in every nook and cranny of my apartment when I lived on the Upper West Side. I mean, it was a real hassle from moving from apartment to apartment. Well, what happened was the reason why I sold my collection was for a couple reasons. I had just finished an 8-year job editing a magazine about CDs and DVDs. Mm-hmm. And that went out of business, so I suppose I was a bit depressed. And, I lost my livelihood to some extent. At the same time, I was in a new relationship with a woman who talked me into, like, why are you carrying all this stuff around? Your phone could have it all. You should be, digitizing your records. So I would do, your CDs. So it was like a combination of things. I was trying to, convince myself I could live without this stuff. It's funny, George Carlin, the comedian, used to talk about how, people just collect stuff. The reason they have a house is to put their stuff in.
Which is very true. It's funny because we had a meeting at PSS last week, and the subject of vinyl came up because one of the staff, who's 30 years old, said, well, what is vinyl? I don't know what vinyl, I didn't know what vinyl was. And I happened to have an LP next to me, and I lifted it up and put it into the Zoom meeting. And then she's like, oh, are the lyrics on the back or inside, or what is it? And then another person chimed in who I believe is about 40, and she said, listening to vinyl is just the best sound quality ever. And I love to listen to my mom's records, and I love to just, I love LPs. So talk about that a little bit. What's happening demographically?
Well, I have a slide actually that, basically what goes around comes around. And so it starts in 1964, and you see Meet the Beatles. And then in the late 60s, 8-tracks were really popular, because you could play it in your car. Cassettes also around the same time. And then CDs reinvigorated the music industry in the early 80s. And at the time, and I talk about this in the book, in the early 80s, teenagers weren't that interested in music, or, listening to records. They were playing video games. It was like the beginning of Atari was very popular, and also MTV first started with music videos, so they could get the music off of television. So the industry really needed to reinvent itself. And the CD was a cash cow for about 25 years, but they were also overpriced. And
you could never get the damn containers or the
right.
packaging.
And then when they would break, that was kind of the irony of it. Housing what was known as a jewel case.
Right.
To make it sound like it was very valuable. And then as soon as you would drop it, it would break. And I once interviewed Lou Reed, and he hated jewel cases and the CD. He didn't mind so much like a well-mastered CD, but he preferred vinyl, for example. His entire catalog is now reissued on vinyl, on Record Store Day, actually. He did a really great job bringing back his records. So when, and by, and then there was like this intermediate step with iTunes, and Steve Jobs introduced the iPod. So finally there was an MP3 player that was not clumsy to use. Now what sort of ushered that period in was Napster, and people downloading music for free. But, like I said, so this slide goes up to 2014, but it was around 2012 or so. So the first record store date was in 2008. But every year after, the growth was exponential, more than double-digit growth year to year. And but on at this slide, 2014, I remember a record company executive, Tom Silverman, said to me, "It's not a fact. Exponential growth is a trend that has traction and is sticking." So, he was also, it's interesting, Tom was also predicting that streaming would take over too, and he was right about that. Because at that point, Spotify was just, on the horizon and coming.
So you brought some albums with you. So talk about what you brought and why.
Yeah, so Petula Clark, I remember being about 3 or 4 years old, having a bath, and it must have been playing on the radio in the background or something like that, the song Downtown. And I remember singing to it. My mother thought that was very funny. And my mom, she passed away in 2017. She worked in the music industry. We had very different tastes, Yeah. So her idea of an English singer was the Engelbert Humperdinck, and mine was the Beatles. So this was actually the very first record that I bought.
I can agree with that.
So let me think. It was probably 1971 when I bought this.
But it came out.
72.
Prior to that. It came
right.
Out in
Yeah.
the 60s.
Yeah. 60s.
Because
right.
Introducing the Beatles came out before Meet the Beatles in this country. Anyway.
But I should back up. Actually, around the time that Beatlemania happened, 1964, my grandmother gave me a transistor radio, which sort of opened up a whole world for me with music. I didn't realize. My mother would have like kids records and things like that, and she had like Broadway show soundtracks and things like that. My mom also worked in the music business for a music publisher, and she had these stories about how various up and coming singers would come in, and my father also worked in the music business. He was a warehouse manager for Columbia Records, and when they were married, he didn't want his wife to be working, and instead insisted that she soon I came along and stay home with the kids, type of thing. So, but getting back to so actually prior to buying this, I bought in 1971 a cassette player, and my very first cassette was Chuck Berry's. It was the London sessions, but it had the big hit single was "My Ding-a-Ling," which apparently
I remember that.
which I apparently thought was a very funny song or something like that. But on the other hand, I at that stage already knew that all rock and roll was derived from Chuck Berry. That role of Beethoven was the key to like all the Beatles and the Beach Boys. And
so what else? What's
all right?
What's
So
in your pile?
okay, so the best-selling record of all time is the Eagles' Greatest Hits, which I find fascinating. Number 2 was Michael Jackson, and it was only recently that the Eagles.
The Thriller album.
The Thriller, yeah, exactly. I was always an Eagles fan, and in college I remember reviewing one of the shows, and I was really embarrassed by the writing. It said something like, it ended with, "Man, what a peaceful, easy feeling."
Now, why do you have the plastic?
Oh,
still?
yeah. Well, actually, so that when you find in a used record store the original plastic, there is it increases the value. And this is actually my very own copy that was purchased at Corvette's.
Oh my God!
Where I used to buy many of my records. No, I grew up in Long Island. So, but I remember buying Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run there. I remember buying Bob Dylan's Blood on the Tracks there.
So how much is that worth right now?
It probably would not be worth that much because there were so many out in circulation. There are 4 main bands that are quote-unquote valuable in the sense that used record stores especially want to sell them, and people will buy them as soon as they hit the bin. And that would be the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, and Pink Floyd. And I know this firsthand because I would help my friend at his store out in Long Island. About once a month, he would take a day off. And he said, will you watch the store? And I always thought it was funny because when I was a teenager, I wanted that job. I remember going to a record store where I would regularly buy records, and I bought my stereo from him. I figured if I kept giving him money, and I asked him for a job at one point, and he was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't need anybody." And so 35 years later, I finally.
You had more cartoons to show.
Oh, okay. So, you asked about who's buying records.
Yeah, the generate, yeah.
Okay, so Teach Your Children Well, which is actually, a song from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. This is actually one of my favorite records as a teenager, and I still listen to it often. So, you see the Spotify little balloon there, the two kids, and then the parents are represented by the CD, and then the grandparents are the LP and the cassette. And it's just kind of a funny little way of how records are now multi-generational. And I know this, actually I have another slide that gets into that a little bit. But I think even the baby boomers, PSS coming of age, can relate to this. So this was the original couple that were on the cover of the Woodstock album.
Wow.
And by the way, I mean, the Woodstock, not only was Woodstock 1 and 2 reissued in the past few years, but they came up with a 3 or 4, 5 volume 3, 4, and 5. And on volume 4, I have that one. There's a 10 years after performance of Help Me that is just incredible. You know, I'm Going Home was like one of the highlights of the movie, but this is even better. So, it's too bad it didn't make the movie. But
What's the original of the Woodstock album worth, do you think?
again, I mean, because there was so many sold, it's not that unusual.
bad,
Yeah.
What condition do your albums have to be in
Ve-
order for
ve-
someone to want
ex-
to buy them?
Excellent. Well, I mean, I'm not that picky. I mean, some of the other records I brought here tonight, were used, and I mean, some of them are a little more scratchy than others. But there are,
Turn
people.
it around so everybody can see.
So this is the first Fleetwood Mac album with Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks. Rhiannon was like the big hit. Over My Head was on this one, I think. Landslide. I mean, it's a really, really great record. And the follow-up, Rumors, was also among the best-selling records of all time.
I had both.
So, but again, I mean,
But I don't any longer.
those records were such big sellers that they're not that rare. Although there's always a demand for it. I mean, when they do hit used record stores, they sell out. And also when they get repressed, they sell it immediately too.
What about ancient times records like early Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole and Edie Gourmet?
Yeah, I mean, usually there's not much of a resale.
On those.
And really, all you need to do is go to any thrift store, and that's what you'll see for the most part. And you get them for only $1 a piece. So.
Oh well, my mom's stash isn't worth anything then. I don't know about you, but I grew up on Saturday mornings was cleaning day, and my mom would put the records on, and so I had like the soundtrack of my life were her albums. Don't Go to Strangers. Yeah.
But I mean, record collecting is a very interesting hobby, and those who know what is really valuable, can sometimes. I'll give you an example. In my book, tell the story about a block and a half away from where I live. This pop-up store emerged, and the story behind that was a former collector and college professor died of COVID, but he had amassed this amazing collection. But he was sort of like a Robin Hood of sorts. His idea was to buy it and then give it to nonprofit organizations. So there was this community bookstore in Washington Heights where I live, Word Up, and they decided that they would, he would give it to them and say, but this stuff is worth a lot more than what I paid for it, and try to make some. Well, the problem is, he amassed the stuff, but he never gave it to them. So when he was on his deathbed, he unfortunately caught COVID, and he had told my friend Veronica, you need to take out a pad. I have to tell you what I have and what I would like to see if you can do it. Yeah. I mean, right after they had this conversation, he was put on a ventilator and passed away like the next day. So, I mean, it really was towards the end. But at this store, for example, I saw a Donny Hathaway live at the Bitter End record store day release, which I had heard about but had never seen before. And I knew that was probably worth a couple $100, so I bought that. And then, and this stuff still had the shrink on it. Then there was this 90s band, Garbage, their first album, again shrink wrap. And I knew that was worth at least $500. But of course I opened it and then devalued it at that point. But like I said, I'm really in it for the music,
Right.
because I really just wanted to hear the record.
So, what are you going to do with your collection? Are you?
Well, actually, what's really fortunate is, I have a daughter who's 24, and she has caught the vinyl collecting bug. Annie, and it's funny, she had called me about 4 years ago when she was in college, maybe 5 years ago, and she said, are you still doing that record stuff? So I said, yes. Why do you ask? So she says, well, I think I'm ready for a record player, which I thought was okay. So she said, I know exactly what I want. I'm going to send you the link. And she wanted one of these Crosley, suitcase.
Yeah, that's the kind I have.
Which were very popular at Urban Outfitters.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I said to her, I could get you that, but, there are probably better models that I could also get you instead. And she goes, no, I want this. I like the color. I know what I want. And I knew a representative from Crosley that we had already done some work together. And in fact, he had provided my conference making vinyl with a better one that we were giving away as awards and packaging. But in any case, Annie, was serious about it. I didn't know if she was trying to impress a boy that you met or something like that at school or something. But, and when she came home, I realized it was a legitimate interest. And about 2.5 years after that, she said to me, I think I'm ready for a better sound system. And her stereo is better than mine right now. So, but we go record collecting every once in a while. Yeah. And she's going to law school next
I see.
September. Yeah. So
now, do you think she's going to possibly do anything with rights?
No, she's more interested in social justice.
Okay.
So
A different kind of
yeah,
rights.
see, I mean, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I would have probably gone into either entertainment law or environmental law were the two areas that I was interested in. I couldn't afford it. I didn't want to go into debt. So I'm glad one of us is going to get that dream. So,
Does anybody have questions for Larry? Anyone out there? Jeff?
I remember when I would leave the plastic on the record store owner would say, you really have to remove that because if it gets overheated, the record could warp.
well, that's true, actually. It depends on how tightly, it shouldn't be leaning, it should be standing, straight, not like this, because those records will warp. The temperature is very important. If the temperature is okay, I mean, in terms of regular room temperature, it should be all right. Another question.
You mentioned that the four LPs that are most valuable to collectors are the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and Fleetwood Mac, and what was the fourth one?
Rolling Stone.
Rolling Stone. Are the CDs of those artists also valuable on the resale market, or is it just the vinyl?
I would say generally no, but CDs are coming back in a way, not at the same level as LPs, but the reason for that is new pressings of vinyl. There's a bottleneck and a backlog, and it'll take 10 months for a record if a record company puts in an order. So sometimes consumers will not want to wait, especially on new releases, and they will buy like Taylor Swift's new record or Adele's new record. I mean, Adele's a little different story though, because they did flood the market with newly pressed Adele records for the last one. But Taylor Swift's a good example. That there's a limited number, and there will be more CDs. Now, on the other hand, if you go to Facebook, for example, there are all kinds of CD collector groups, and they talk about going to the local thrift store and finding these great CDs of some of the bands that that we just talked about. There might be a little bit more value for a Pink Floyd CD or a Beatles CD, but I don't think it's as much on the vinyl side. Another question?
I'm going to pull the lens back on this question, so take as much or as little as you like, but we're talking really about a resale market, right? And I'm thinking back when resales first started with technology that allowed scalpers to, sell tickets online. And now I saw this article recently that said vinyl is the new sneakers. And I remember when Michael Jordan, remember Air Jordans, when they became like this big resale market thing. So can you, whatever amount you want to talk about, but talk about vinyl in relation to the creation of a resale market. Thank you.
Great question. So, yeah, you're right about the resale. Well, I'll tell you one thing about the record collectors know what they're doing. That they'll find in the wild, a record for $10, but they know it's worth $100 or more on eBay and stuff. They're flippers. The same way that people would wait in line for new sneakers that came out for $50 that they'll buy the new pair, but they know they could get $500 on eBay in a week. So I think it's interesting that I think what you're referring to is something called the first sale doctrine, that basically said that it was okay to for a consumer to sell the CD that they bought, and then a store can resell it for whoever's interested in buying it. And that also transferred to other media as well, like books, for example. Booksellers did that as well. Now, the creator doesn't really profit from that at all. And I also know this, being an author. So I had 2 other books prior to this, and they sell on Amazon for $1 or so, and I don't get any money from the additional sales. It's just that first sale that.
Larry, do you have a favorite LP?
That's a great question. I do, yeah. Actually, the punk rock singer Patti Smith has a record called Horses. That sort of changed my life when I heard it. So yeah, I think to this day it's still my favorite all-time record. Yeah.
I think that's because she was flirting with it.
Yes.
I remember records coming in, I think Grand Funk Railroad had this album that was like an amber color that was see-through, like almost yellow. And I wonder if those kinds of records or any kind of different types of records like that.
Well, I think that's one of the things why records are interesting to younger demographic, for example, that the packaging is really fantastic often, and that the CD really didn't do it justice. So there are variations of particular covers. You know, one band I forgot, I left out, The Doors, will sell almost as soon as it gets into the store. LA Woman had like a clear plastic in particular that I remember, that if you have that version of it, you know, it will be more valuable.
What about 45s?
45s have a different type of mystique to them. Personally, I mean, I have probably 600 45s, but they really, for them to be resellable and, you know, and valuable, they really have to be in really perfect condition. Yeah. I mean, there's a great scene in High Fidelity, the movie. And the John Cusack character owns a record store, and he gets a call from a woman whose husband had this amazing punk rock collection of 45s, of the original Sex Pistols, God Save the Queen, Anarchy in the UK, worth $1,000. And she was like, you know, take it all for $10. You take the entire collection. And he was like, I can't do this to another record. Now he found out that, you know, he cheated on his wife with his secretary, and they were like in the Bahamas now on vacation. So
I remember that movie, but vaguely. So there's lots of pictures in your book.
yeah.
Nice color photos, and anyone who sticks around will also get the chance to have Larry sign their book if they brought one or want to purchase one. Is there anything else that you want to share on your deck here?
Kevin, you had it. Actually.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Kevin.
I wanted to ask, you know, I saw a resurgence in vinyl during the early days of the hip hop generation, when firstly artists were looking for pieces to sample, and secondly how they used vinyl for the process of scratching. And I saw, like I said, a resurgence during that period. I just wonder, Larry, what you thought about that period, and how that affected the sale of vinyl records during that period, particularly during the late 80s and early 90s.
Well, one of the customers that used to come into my friend's store was a DJ. And he would comb the dollar bins for like soul stuff and funk stuff, like from the 70s. And he was like listening for specific beats that he could use and you know, remix and play around with. And he would leave with like 100 records.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's an art form in itself. You know, and obviously there've been, you know, all kinds of you know, litigation about sampling. You know, that record companies have to do it smartly. They can't just, you know, infringe copyrights like that. I guess that one of the famous examples of that was Tom's Diner, Suzanne Vega song.
Yeah.
And eventually it all played out, you know, and you know, she had a much more popular record than was originally recorded after that.
When's the next Making Vinyl?
It's actually next month, June 18th, June 23rd and 24th in Nashville. We sold out like a month before it.
Is this your first in-person?
Since 2019, yeah, we were last time in Los Angeles in October of 2019. We have the Grammy Award-winning producer T-Bone Burnett as the closing keynote speaker, so that'll be happening. We also have a who's who of the record manufacturing industry there. So, this year, the last 2 months, the program came together very quickly, and that's my main responsibility. I'm also now working on one for Germany in September 1st.
And you're going to be speaking and interviewing again, not too far from now, in New York at the beautiful new library.
Yeah.
5th Avenue and 41st Street.
40th Street, yeah. New York Public Library is the Stavros Neocros, probably mispronouncing Foundation Library.
I didn't try, that's why.
And I'll be interviewed there by Ken Dashow, Q104.3 DJ, who, Q104.3 was Tony Soprano's favorite radio station. And Ken, we met at Beatles Fest at the beginning of April, and he interviewed me for his podcast. We had a great time. And then we have two record industry executives as well.
Great, and that's on
June 18th, Saturday at 2 p.m. What's interesting is June 18th is what they call the Record Store Day Drop. So I mentioned before that there's a backlog of records, and because of supply chain issues, some of the records that were supposed to be delivered on April 23rd, which was Record Store Day this year, didn't make the list. So there's like another 100 or so records that are going to be out for the first time
on that day?
June 18th.
Is that why you picked that day, or is it?
No, it was actually the libraries. It just, they had the open space. And so it was just a coincidence.
Okay. I think you had an end slide too with some information about how to reach you or how to. What was it again? I did have one more slide though. Any final questions?
What was the first 45 you bought?
I think it was probably, you're going to laugh when you hear this, Deep Purple's Woman from Tokyo. It was a song that I liked. So yeah, I think that was it.
What was your...
I was trying to remember as you were speaking, and I cannot remember. Oh wait, Surf City, Jan and Dean, Surf City.
That was a good choice.
Well, in addition to resale, aren't there a lot of new albums being produced and made and sold in places like Urban Outfitters? And are they repressings or are they current contemporary popular?
Well, it's a mix of both, actually. And it's funny, on my way over here tonight, I did go to Urban Outfitters to let them know about the book and see if they were planning on selling it there. And they were very interested, actually.
Are there any more categories than just repressings and vintage?
Well, I'd say the lion's, I would say lion's share, but about 70% of the records being produced are reissues of catalog titles and what's being sold. That's not to say that new artists are not getting their records made. They are. So, I mean, for example, a company called Vinyl Me Please is a record club of sorts, but they do sell a la carte. And they also sign new artists. They had a need to make sure that their records are being produced, that they are manufacturing a new factory in Denver, Colorado. So that'll probably be on, like, the next 6 months or so, they'll be making records by that point.
What's the biggest manufacturing of vinyl scene? You mentioned Denver. Is there like one?
Yeah, no. In Nashville is the hot spot at the moment. And the funny thing is, Third Man Records president, Ben Blackwell, is interviewed in the book, and Jack White, Ben's uncle, the two of them built a plant in Detroit back in 2017, which was the first year that we did making vinyl. We did it in Detroit. So that worked out really perfectly. But I remember asking Ben in January 2021, when I was working on the book, did you ever think of making building a plant in Nashville? And he said to me very drolly, Nashville already has a plant. What he meant was United Record Pressing has been around since the 1940s, and it's a huge plant. And at the point, he figured they had all the work they needed. But what happened since then was a brand new plant called Nashville Record Pressing was announced. There's already another one called Physical Music Products that's already making records. There's even another one not too far away. Memphis Record Pressing is increasing its capacity, doubling in size. So there's and United Record Pressing, the one that I mentioned before, is also doubling in size. So since I mentioned Jack White, in March he had made a plea for the major labels to get back into the record pressing business. I knew that they weren't interested in doing that, and actually in my book I had talked to the major labels, and none of them seemed to be interested in doing that. They're perfectly fine with outsourcing this. So when I met Jack about a month ago, I said to him, you made this plea, but it looks like the capacity is coming from other sources. So, and what was really nice of him was that he thanked me in making vinyl for keeping this alive. I'm like, well, you're the evangelist in this. I mean, you're the pioneer, and really, I mean, he has this slogan, your turntable is not dead, which, is very true.
Okay. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Larry, thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
I have a feeling it could have gone on forever.
Yeah, no, I love talking about this stuff.
We had, they're going to kick us out of the room soon, but bye all.